sessions this weekend on Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. And I decided, even though this is the shortest of the book, to spend 2 sessions on the Machiavelli, if that's agreeable to you, and I want to explain my reasons why. The Machiavelli, or put it this way, those 4 books together make up the block that one might call modern natural right. You can divide the history of political philosophy very easily, very simply, into 3 periods. You see the ancient natural right teaching, the Socratic foundings, the modern natural right teaching, which, essentially Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, the state, what we know as the state of nature, and then the historical school, or historicism. And I believe that there are really only those 3. Within them, of course, there are great divergencies, but you say that each of those 3 schools begins with the same fundamental premises, the same fundamental problems, and tries to elaborate a specific understanding of nature, or, well, in the case of the most modern school, of history. This segment of Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, with Machiavelli as its underpinning, is not the most modern school, nor even the most influential in the way of thought, but it is the school upon which liberal democracy is founded, our institutions, and therefore it's of the greatest importance. My argument, of course, is that Machiavelli is the most fundamental figure in that school, even though he's largely not understood to be a member of that school, but that he provided the fundamental, I don't want to use the overworked term, revolution that brought about the new teachings of natural right or natural law as opposed to the old. You may be surprised. Usually the way of dividing political philosophy is ancient philosophy, medieval philosophy, and modern philosophy. But my understanding, at least within the political, is that medieval philosophy does not differ essentially from the ancient. I think that's the way they understood themselves, to the extent that it's political philosophy. Obviously, to the extent that it's Mohammedan, Christian, or Jew, certain adaptations had to take place, but that, what you might call theological or question of faith. But in terms of what the good regime is, what natural right and natural law are, they essentially understood themselves simply to be following or adapting, Aristotle. I think it's always wise to follow men's own self-understanding until you find that it's inadequate. And this was the view that was held by, as I said, people like Thomas or Averroes or Maimonides in the first place, and in the second place, their opponents regarded them as essentially the same as the ancients. So I don't think that there is that same kind of fundamental break. There's a fundamental new problem, of course, the biblical revelation that occurs between ancient and medieval thought. But that was not the question of political philosophy. The question of political philosophy is what's the good regime. And therein, I don't think that there is a fundamental distinction. If you want to discuss that, I could stop on that issue for a moment. But that is the way in which I understand it, that somehow there is ancient philosophy in which ancient political philosophy in which medieval would be one subsection. I believe that's the way Machiavelli took it, as well as the practitioners themselves. Would you agree with that formula, Ernest? You know that infinitely, but...
The whole Christian medieval period provides no input into the foundations of modern
Yes, I would. I do not believe that school. I don't know enough about it. Obviously certain sorts of things started happening. With practical things, with the usual thing that's pointed to as representation. But I believe that the meaning of what a representative is entirely different. A representative was somebody who went to the king to ask for something, not as a bearer of legitimacy. And I think that requires, I mean, that we can discuss when we come to Hobbes and Locke. I think that absolutely that was a crucial transformation. There's always a desire to see all good things in one's own tradition. We begin by assuming that democracy is a good thing, and we assume what our tradition is, therefore, or what your tradition is, and what must be, it must be there. And I do think that it comes from a certain kind of wishful thinking. I mean, I don't know those arguments very well. I've heard them, and I've never been impressed. I think, I mean, in a way that allows me to attach it immediately to Machiavelli. I think that the fundamental newness of Machiavelli is underestimated not only within the Catholic teaching, but by all scholars these days, and that one tries to find a certain continuity of development. I think you probably heard this already. Well, The Prince is a very traditional book. There were the mirrors of the princes, and it goes back to a practical tradition and a theoretical tradition which existed previously. And of course, one can read the book in that way. Or this is one can look for all the traditional things. But then, of course, one has to forget a lot of passages in it. And of course, my argument, what I'm going to try to discuss with you, is that a really radical break was made with Machiavelli. Essentially, I don't like these kinds of categorizations, kind of historical categorizations, but you can say that the school that says that democracy came out of the medieval practice and theory denies that there was a Renaissance. No, I don't think I wouldn't say there was a Renaissance, an important thing, but that Machiavelli and two or three other people really made a fundamental change. And I can say that, a sort of règle générale for the interpretation of classical texts, or even classic texts, is not to find their similarities with other books, but to find their differences. And I think that our tendency is to look too much for the influences, the samenesses, and so on, and to see the real difference. And Machiavelli hides that difference because, he's quite explicit about it, but he's explicit, but in a very low-key way, and so one has to look for it. But it was Machiavelli was understood to be a radical break by the people who hated him, and I think people's enemies at the time are very good judges. Historians aren't aren't involved with what the real practical issue is. So yeah, my answer would be certainly. Ernest would be able to talk about this much better than I can, but I as a student, listen to Maritain occasionally and so on, and they really have to pull out passages from Thomas or something like that, which don't really mean very much and which don't differ very much from Aristotle. I mean, Aristotle had not a preference for democracy, but he thought it was very important to have consent. But you can say, I would say, if you want a quick formulation, that all power is derived from the consent of the governed is the modern formulation, and I don't think anybody held that before. Machiavelli didn't say that the people who built on Machiavelli's revolution. That's my answer to. But the reason why I want to spend so much time on Machiavelli is not only the fundamental character of it. I know this is a teaching program, and I always find that Machiavelli is, if properly taught, not to teach it properly, but with some kind of attention, some kind of passion, can be the most moving book for students, the most striking experience, and can lead them very well into the whole tradition of political philosophy. These last 3 or 4 years, I've used it as the introductory book in the introductory course, instead of beginning with Plato or Aristotle as I used to, and I found it was a much better way to begin. Another thing I might suggest, by the way, is that they use this edition, which is not, the translation is no good, but it's got Italian on the other face, and it gives them a chance to look across at words, which is a very good, there are some continually bad translations, and if you start pointing that out to them, it interests them, and that they can look across and say, did he really say that? Even if they don't know Italian. They can just look for the words like fortuna, virtù, which which plays such an important role. But so, and now the question is, why is the book so attractive? I mean, just,